side of Channel 7 in Cairns at 1 p.m. today to read my statement on the action governments need to take urgently regarding the firebombing of the Synagogue in Melbourne and the alarming rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. Our PM's priorities are so wrong that he doesn't visit a burning synagogue but flies to Perth and has drinks with donors and plays tennis. Maybe he's elbow tennis is a bit of elbow tennis. It sounds like Nero playing the fiddle while Rome burns. Even worse, he denied playing tennis until caught by a reporter. One commentator called it a backhander for Jews. I call it a slap in the face. My wife and I are co-founders of Indigenous Friends of Israel International, and we condemn the terrorist act that destroyed the Adass Synagogue in Melbourne on December the 6th, as we were honouring the stand of Aboriginal people led by William Cooper against Kristallnacht in 1938. 86 years later, the Nazi Holocaust has reached the shores of Australia with the shattering of glass and firebombing of a synagogue with people inside, and destroying sacred Torah scrolls and century-old sacred texts and objects. This is a tipping point. A line must be drawn in the sand. The anti-Israel stand of our government and its weak reaction to protest has created an environment of encouraging anti-Semitism, terrorism. On the very day, December the 6th, that the Israel and German embassies in Canberra erected a plaque in honour of William Cooper, who stood up against the shattered glass and firebombing of synagogues in Europe. It happens here on our doorstep in Australia, a place I call home, a place that I love, and many, many Australians born and love this nation. This is our home. On the very day the United with William Cooper event in Melbourne released a statement to the Victorian government condemning anti-Semitism and asking for more action on social cohesion, the terrorist struck. We condemned the demonstrations outside the Great Synagogue in Sydney on Wednesday that left people terrified as they locked themselves in. We had visited recently that synagogue just before, 2 hours before the prior of that stand demonstrations, along with the firebombing of a car in Woollahra, Sydney recently, and the firebombing of the electorate office of Jewish MP Josh Burns. We demand to know when enough is enough, when the government will draw a line in the sand of this domestic terrorism. These attacks are designed to produce terror to the Jewish community. So are an attack on all Jewish Australians, and are also an attack on the Australians of goodwill, all Australians. It is an attack on our social cohesion and Australian values. It is an attack on what has been till now successful multiculturalism nation. The progressive attack on Israel by the Australian government support for a number of anti-Israel resolutions in the United Nations since the Labor government came into power has added fuel to fire of anti-Semitism. It has taken 2 days for the Prime Minister to state that the synagogue firebombing was terrorism, and he is expected to finally visit today. There are 5 days, and I think it's so important that he has more time there with the Jewish people and really embrace them as the Prime Minister, as a leader, and he should continually show that true leadership. That is what Australia needs. That is what Australia is lacking from this government. The inaction and merely mouth words of Prime Minister Albanese, our streets and university in Australia are also, and we see the vitriol from Foreign Minister Penny Wong have emboldened thugs on our streets and universities in Australia, and rightly drawn criticism from the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. He warned us that our government is encouraging terrorist attacks by fueling anti-Israel and anti-Semitism sentiment. On Wednesday, the Australian government reversed 20 years of bipartisanship and supported a UN resolution demanding an end to Israel's unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territories of Gaza, West Bank and East Jerusalem. It has also called for the end of new settlement activities and the removal of settlers from occupied territories. It called for a conference next June to set the Palestinian territories on an irreversible pathway to a two-state solution. So Australia and the UN are calling for ethnic cleansing of Jews from their ancient homeland. For a start, what some call the West Bank and Judea and Samaria is the heartland of ancient Israel. And I know as an Indigenous person in Australia, I've visited Israel 12 times, so I know what the land and the people are. And they don't occupy the land, they own the land. Also Jerusalem is not occupied, and not the West Bank. It is an ancient undivided capital of Israel. Look what happened when Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. It became a terror stronghold and has continually attacked Israel since. Not to mention the horrific attacks on civilians on October the 7th and the dreadful treatment of hostages still being held. We welcomed the statement yesterday by Reece Kershaw of the Australian Federal Police of new operations. He said, in a sense, they will be flying a flying squad to deploy nationally to incidents. It will include incidents of urging violence against members of groups, advocating terrorism, advocating genocide, using a carriage service to make a threat, and using a carriage service to menace or harass. That was in the Sydney Morning Herald only a few days ago on the 9th of the 12th, 24. We call on the Aboriginal people of Australia who have received wonderful support from the Jewish community over the years to stand with them during this difficult time. We call on the Australian government to, regarding Australia, deal decisively with antisemitism in Australia. This includes adequate laws and enforcement, as hate preachers have not been charged and police have arrested peaceful Jews ostensibly for their safety and facilitated aggressive anti-Israel demonstrators to their destinations. 2, an inquiry needs to be held to see whether current legislation is strong enough and appropriate to deal with protests that get out of hand, and if the police are willing to enforce it. To set up a national police task force to deal with anti-Semitism to ensure Jewish Australians are safe. This has just been announced as I have releasing this statement. State governments should ban demonstrations outside places of worship, whether they are synagogues, churches or mosques, etc. Number 5, institute a system for demonstrations like New South Wales, so that one group of citizens is not on the streets every week intimidating another group of citizens. Assess whether current social cohesion funding is achieving its goal and is going to the most appropriate groups. Set up programs in schools and universities to promote Australian values, interracial and inter-religious harmony, and reduce anti-Semitism. Institute number 8 is to a national judiciary inquiry into anti-Semitism in universities, which have become breeding grounds for anti-Semitism. A parliamentary inquiry is not good enough. Follow due diligence in security checks for visas from areas of conflict like Gaza, including using the character test. Non-citizens committing hate crimes should have their visas revoked. AGO should not play down anti-Semitic violence by calling it politically motivated violence. Regarding Israel, support Israel at the United Nations instead of terror organisations, and reverse its many decisions adverse to Israel, including the one last week and the recent one on Palestinian sovereignty of resources. It is not the time to ram through a state solution with the Palestinians who already have rejected all such offers in the past, are still at war with Israel and have stated they want a one-state solution, with Israel wiped off the map and all Jews removed dead or alive from river to sea. Call for the immediate release of hostages in Gaza, the cessation of attacks of Israel by Hamas. Hamas is a Hebrew word meaning violence. No wonder we have that spirit of violence all over the world, including our nation of Australia. And other governing structures in Gaza that does not involve Hamas or terrorist groups. Withdraw from the ICC, which is administering impartial justice and has no jurisdiction over Israel. Defund UNRWA because of its funding of Hamas and involvement on October the 7th, and provide humanitarian and via another means. Move the Australian Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. How would we feel if Israel told us they would put their embassy in Brisbane instead of Canberra, because they did not recognise Canberra as our capital? That's a statement I make today, and I hope and believe that we are campaigning very strongly to see anti-Semitism removed from our nation, removed from our streets. And I realise that there is evidence of growing anti-Semitism, which we see even in our streets. And as someone who is Indigenous, I'm very embarrassed. I am so ashamed. We're even to the point that they have said that stopping Jewish people coming to Australia. After all, the Jewish people, what they have done since living in Australia, of the atrocities that they have gone through, we see in Sydney and Melbourne, and I know because I have built up relations with the Jewish people, and they are Holocaust survivors. And so I, as an Indigenous person, from a tribe of Durable, Barbara, and Table and Yiddish, I stand with the nation of Israel, and I say, I'm Israel high. Barbara will say,